and thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited about this panel. Religion has been for many people a way to convene spiritually with God, but also gather with their community. And so that physical ability to gather has been very problematic given cities across the country and around the world have ordered people to stop doing that. So we have with us today Rabbi David Wolpe. He's the Max Webb Senior Rabbi of Sinai Temple and has been named the most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek and one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. Rabbi Wolpe previously taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York, the American Jewish University in Los Angeles, Hunter College, and UCLA. Rabbi Wolpe is the author of 8 books, including the national bestseller, Making Loss Matter, Creating Meaning in Difficult Times. His new book is titled David, the Divided Heart. It was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Awards and has been optioned for a movie by Warner Brothers. Imam Jihad Turk is the founding president of Bayan Claremont Islamic Graduate School, the nation's first Muslim graduate school to offer accredited master's degrees in the fields of Islamic studies, education, chaplaincy, and leadership. Jihad previously served as the Imam and Director of Religious Affairs at the Islamic Center of Southern California, LA's oldest and largest mosque. He is sought after national speaker on issues related to Islam, Muslims in America, Muslim reform movements, ethical leadership, and spiritual and identity formation of youth. Additionally, Jihad has committed himself to building bridges across faith communities to collaboratively address issues of homelessness and poverty. Jihad has been consulted by the White House and traveled around the world for the State Department to speak to Muslim communities abroad and represent the American Muslim community. Jihad, can you say hello?
Hello.
Hi, and I forgot to introduce Rabbi Wolpe. Rabbi Wolpe, can you please say hello?
I'll say hello too.
Yes, great. Last but not least, we have Pastor Adam Mesa. He's the lead pastor of Abundant Living Family Church and speaks to a congregation of 12,000 about how the gospel of Jesus brings purpose to every life. In 2019, the organization Eagle's Wings chose Adam as one of 30-person delegation to visit Israel with the goal of building bridges between Christians and Jews. In March of 2019, the president of Azerbaijan invited Adam to speak at a religion symposium on behalf of the evangelical Christians. His powerful influence as a millennial evangelical has earned him a global platform. The pastor is West Coast Director of Israel Christian Nexus, a member of the Global Leadership Board for Silicon Valley's first faith-based app, Pray.com, millennial strategist for Church United, and a keynote speaker. Thank you, Pastor Adam, for joining us.
Thank you. Hello.
Have you with us?
Thank you so much.
So all of you, it's so great to see you at least virtually here. And without further ado, let's jump into some of these some questions and some of this discussion. I think a lot of people who are joining us, whether or not they themselves are religious, grew up religious, or are spiritual, are curious as to how the novel coronavirus has impacted your own communities in terms of the way people pray and your congregation and how you have been handling that as a leader in that community. So why don't we start with Rabbi Wolpe?
Well, one thing I think is obvious and shared to all of us, which is that you are no longer able to congregate in person. And that's a huge difference in any faith community, because part of a faith community is, as implicit in the word, is a community. And it has forced us to do things as we are now, virtually, but also to think of ways in which we are connected to one another that are not physical. And so it has expanded by both necessity and also by just the overflow of human goodness, all sorts of social services that we do, dropping off food, calling people who are sick. And one unexpected sort of ancillary benefit is tomorrow night is Passover. I, like many people, am doing Passover with my family all over the country and sometimes all over the world, which we could have done in other years, but never thought to do, because after all, you had people in your home. But now we're actually doing Passover in ways that it's smaller, but it's also larger because the internet is as large as the world.
Yeah, I mean, and with Passover tomorrow, I think there's a lot to dig in on that specifically.
Yes.
And so I'll have a bunch of questions on that for you as we continue on, Rabbi. Imam, I'd love to get your thoughts on how things have changed in your community, what people are doing to address their religious needs right now, how you've been participating and handling that.
Well, as you know, also Muslims, we gather weekly in large congregations and listen to a sermon and have a congregational prayer. Conveniently, Muslims gather on Friday, Jews on Saturday, and Christians on Sunday. So we're staggered in that regard. But of course, we've not been able to gather for the weekly Friday sermons, and so many mosques who've already had the technology in place to live stream the sermons have continued to live stream the sermon, sometimes with the speaker, with the Imam at home, and sometimes they'll come to an empty building and stream it using the infrastructure at the mosque. Similarly, there's usually a large Sunday gathering. That's just because people have off, and so we have our Sunday school, and so we've been continuing to stream programs virtually on Sunday, again, either from home or from the community building that's empty. One thing that we have been able to continue to do, and this is something that we started over 15 years ago in conjunction with the Wilshire Boulevard Temple and about 20 churches in the neighborhood, we have something called the HopeNet, which is an interfaith food bank network. And during this time, people, especially those in need, find themselves in dire circumstances. And so we have been able to maintain our food distribution program, but we're following best practices in terms of social distancing. So we have about 300 people who show up every Saturday who line up and receive bags of groceries that sustain them for the week. And so we're still able to do that, but everything else is virtual.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, before we go on to Pastor Adam, Imam, have you seen that increase then in terms of participation, usage of the food bank or
Yeah, it's called HopeNet, and we're a participant in that at the Islamic Center of Southern California, which is on 4th and Vermont. Yeah, so we've had large numbers before, but definitely there's been an increase of probably like a third of the, I mean, by 1/3 it's increased. So it's a big jump.
So thank you so much for that. Pastor Adam, I'd love to hear sort of, from your community perspective, especially during this Holy Week for a lot of people, as they lead into Easter and the end of Lent. Can you talk a little bit about what you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, for us, and every church can have different fluctuations and how they, express it and see things. But, for us, we've seen as a great opportunity, in the Christian church, we have a saying that the church is not its place, it's in its people. And so right now we have just a bunch of little churches meeting in everybody's living room. As the early church started, I mean, the early church was in people's living rooms. So really all we're doing is regressing 2,000 years. Instead of having these big buildings, now we're in our homes just like it used to be. And so, we've really been seeing people being more intentional in their faith. I joke with our congregation. So right now, our church in general, we're doing live streams. We both are able to have a couple of people at our church, but also we built a studio in my dining room. And so we do mini streams over our dining room. And even through pray.com, our senior pastor and myself, we're praying every single day in the app. And the app with pray.com is seeing about 1 million monthly active users this month. It's projected in April. And then this past Saturday, we did a prayer live stream. We called it the Global Live Stream on Facebook through pray.com's Facebook, and 500,000 people tuned on. So what we're seeing really in the evangelical world, especially, as it pertains to Easter, is we're seeing this deep, intense anger, hunger and ownership of their faith. In the past, it would be, you know, maybe someone would call themselves a Christian, but, you know, practice didn't look as strong. They didn't really go to church. They really weren't seeking God. They weren't connecting in their faith. Now we're seeing this huge rise in people's, really in our online viewership, and people connecting into our church. But also, same way with Imam Turk said, is we have a food outreach center ourselves. We have a 10,000 square foot facility. And we've seen, originally we would feed about 3,000 people a week, and we've seen it jump up between 6,000 and 7,000 people a week who are coming for food and natural resources. And we have contracts with Costco and others where they donate goods and services to us. And then basically our church has gained ownership of it. And basically people drive through, they pop their trunk open, and we give them a bunch of groceries in their trunk, and then just have them just keep driving through it, you know? And so we're just looking at incredible opportunities where both people have real practical needs, which is what we believe is our call as Christians, as people who follow Jesus, is to meet people's physical needs. But also there's a huge spiritual hunger as well. And so currently with our church, we're live streaming 7 days a week, some type of service. And so like last night, we live streamed to about 6,000 people. And we just went over the Passion Week in my living room with two other of my pastors on our team. And for 1 hour, we just went through Jesus's last 7 days before in his crucifixion and resurrection. So we're just looking at how we can basically facilitate. People are just saying, hey, I want more. I'm at home. I have nothing to do. My kids go to bed at 8 o'clock. What is there to do? And then for us as a church, we've been like, okay, let's step in now. Let's bring live streams. Let's bring content. Let's bring our church closer than ever. And we're genuinely seeing that. We're seeing more community built up than we ever could imagine meeting in a physical building, which is really, you know, you think it's a juxtaposition. It shouldn't happen that way, but it's been happening that way for churches all over the world in the same way.
Thank you so much, Pastor, for that. And, you know, it seems like a lot of people are really trying to do what they can to, if not gather physically, provide others with the means to be able to make do during this difficult time. You know, I want to come back to Rabbi Wolpe. You talked a little bit about, you mentioned Passover and the fact that it begins Wednesday night at sundown. And there has been, obviously, you know, in Judaism, people go to synagogues on you know, daily, weekly basis, you know, similar to in actually all three of these religions. But you know, this past Saturday, you gave a sermon that discussed you know, some issues about Passover, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, what you've been seeing, and how.
Well, so the sermon that I gave was essentially, I don't generally give sermons of rebuke, but this was a little bit of a sermon of rebuke because I had members who said, my family is planning to gather and I'm scared of it. So I basically gave a sermon that said, do not do that. That if you want to, that it's not worth gathering together, imperiling people, especially older people. You want to be able to gather together next year. So don't do it this year, even though I understand that for some people, it is literally an embarrassment to say to others, you can't come to my home for Passover, even though I had originally invited you. But that embarrassment, as difficult as it is, and I don't underestimate how powerful social embarrassment is for some people, as difficult as it is, it doesn't begin to compare to, as I said, the way you will not forgive yourself if from your Passover Seder, somebody gets sick or, God forbid, worse than that. And so I think that what you heard from Imam Turk and Pastor Adams is the sort of perfect anecdote, which is that in some ways people are being more responsive and being more participatory from the fact that they can't be in person. So I strongly encourage, to put it mildly, and now all of the sermons obviously are, they were always online, now they're also on YouTube. I strongly encourage people to stay home, to observe only with their immediate family, in order that next year we will be in a place where we can once again observe with everyone. And I hope that the message took, because it really is one of those cases where you don't feel fear and yet have to act fearful. And that's part of what's so difficult about this time. Is it's not like Godzilla's outside your house, so you don't open the door because you're terrified. It's, well, most people survive, or most people are asymptomatic, and I don't really feel afraid. So, and you're trying to get people to have their rational mind override their lack of fear. So I'm asking people to act like they're scared, even if they're not scared, and to be healthy and to stay safe.
So how are people going to be gathering Wednesday night? What's the synagogue doing? What's it?
So we have a virtual Seder that Rabbi Sherman and Guzik, I'll participate a little at the beginning, and then Rabbi Sherman and Guzik will be running the Seder, and then since outside of Israel it is the tradition to have a Seder for 2 nights, people can replay the Seder from the first night, and just in case they didn't get it right the first time, and they can have it the second night with the same Seder, but on repeat. And of course, we have services every morning and every afternoon that are also live streamed, and we will have them on Passover too. One of the interesting things, I a little bit envy the pastor that he has a studio in his living room. I got to get with your people. We don't have a studio in my living room, but great setup.
Let me know. I'll help you out, Rabbi.
Right,
I got you.
Exactly. but what I was going to say is, we're like Zooming from everybody's house. So the cantor who lives in the valley, he's Zooming from his house, and Rabbi Sherman and Guzik, who live just down the block from me, we're Zooming from their house. And it's funny how all these pieces are sort of getting put together. So.
Yeah, so I mean, with all of the reliance on technology, I'm curious, just as a quick follow-up, Rabbi, and then I want the others to weigh in. Not everyone in the Jewish faith is
Yes.
One, okay with the use of technology, and 2, if they are okay with it, capable of using the technology fully. So I'd love
we have 2 obstacles, as you just so perfectly summarized, to technology, which is why our other services hadn't been on YouTube. There was some resistance in the synagogue on the Sabbath to using live streaming. So we were still discussing it when coronavirus came along and made it a moot point, because you had to do it. So we would record the sermons, but we wouldn't live stream them. In the Orthodox community, there's a virtual prohibition against the use of electronics on the Sabbath of all kinds. And in fact, only this year, for the very first time, certainly in my lifetime, and actually in history, because electronics weren't common before that, many Orthodox rabbis, both here and in Israel, said you're allowed to Zoom the Seder because you can't be physically with other people, but that is only permissible this year as a sort of emergency measure. So yeah, it's a harder thing. One of the reasons why you don't have large virtual audiences for Jewish services is streaming is a new thing for many of us. But I think that it's a very good development, and I hope that this will kickstart a virtual presence for Jews not only across the country, but across the world, because there are a lot of places. I'm getting emails and messages now from all over the world saying it's so nice now that we can see all these services, because in my small town in God knows where, we don't really have many Jews to have a service, or we don't have a service like you have. And so our opportunity now to participate has been increased tremendously, even though we're stuck in our homes.
I'm curious, Imam, have you in your community found any sort of reluctance to allowing people to participate in services, either over issues of jurisprudence, or just because people don't really know how to use the technology adequately?
Yeah, so this is a very lively conversation that's ongoing. So jurisprudentially speaking, so it's a religious obligation for every adult male, at least, and females are encouraged, women are encouraged to attend as well, the Friday sermon in person. So it's called a Jummah Khutbah. So everyone, not chutzpah. That's a different language there, but related. The Friday khutbah, the Friday sermon, is you have to go in person. And so some communities, I was just reading an article this morning in Florida, they're still meeting, but they are somehow, it's a large community. Florida has an exception for religious gatherings. I am not on board with what they're doing, but they are meeting 6 feet apart, and they showed a video of everyone still gathering and observing social distancing while in a very large building. The issue the issue with live streaming is most scholars who've weighed in on this have denied the permissibility of a virtual attendance of a Friday sermon, denied that it can fulfill the religious obligation. So because of that challenge, and that's kind of, universal. I mean, 1/4 of the world's planet is Muslim, and Muslims generally observe this idea that you can't virtually attend a service and have it count. So what they're doing instead is, the scholars have said it is no longer an obligation to attend in person. In fact, it is your obligation to stay home, because the social welfare takes precedence over the religious obligation. So stay at home and just pray a normal midday prayer in the place of the congregational prayer. But if you still would like to stream a service just to get the inspiration, you're welcome to do so, but it won't count towards a congregational obligation, which is no longer required anyway under the current circumstances. So it's very convoluted and very much in the weeds, but these are the kinds of conversations that are taking place around Muslim communities around the country and around the world.
I mean, in all sorts of communities across the country. You mentioned that community and there are pockets of such communities across the country that continue to meet. Some of the high profile ones do involve Christians, and I did want to kind of ask Pastor Adams to sort of weigh in on that. Sorry, I said Pastor Adam. Pastor Adams.
No, it's Pastor Mesa. I don't know where there's an S there. You're good. It's okay. Pastor Adam. Yeah, I was wondering too. I was like, where'd that S get there?
All right. Yeah, so I wanted you to weigh in, Pastor, just on what you've been seeing, and how have you been reacting to this? How have other, members of the community that you've talked to dealt with this sort of weird juxtaposition of many, many people staying home, but then obviously, there are many people who are Christians in the U.S. seeing others who aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are some, small minorities who have, chosen not to, but by and large in, popular Christianity or majority Christianity, especially in the United States, by and large, all of them have closed their doors down, and they're doing, incredibly unique things like, I have a friend, Paul Daughtry in Oklahoma, where they did a drive-in service where you drove into the parking lot, you set your radio station to the service, and he was standing on the roof getting the sermon, and they had thousands of people show up. And so, by and large, within our faith is, we're called evangelicals for a reason. Evangelism is big for us. Getting the message of Jesus out to the world is hugely important to us. And so we have for many years, all the way going back down to Billy Graham, and even down to Amy Semple McPherson in Los Angeles, have been on television sharing sermons. And so this is going back to the early days of television in the early 1930s that the evangelical church has been on quote unquote TV. And so for online and digital, we have somewhat, over the past decade, many churches have basically paved the way through basically technology and innovation, and many of the online platforms have been innovated through Christians who have tried to figure out how to live stream their services better, how to increase their audio quality. Praise and worship, the music of our faith, is really important to us. And so we've really focused on how do we deliver great sound as we do praise and worship. So what's happening, there's a couple things that are happening that are really great. It's uniting pastors more than ever, because none of us have it figured out. And so in the past, when we're just meeting in person, we basically many times could be on our own islands, taking care of our own congregations, taking care of our own communities. But in the midst of this, it's almost been like, hey, what's working for you? Hey, how are you doing that? How did you do that? And it's basically opened up our network, realizing we're all in this fight together. We're all trying to do this together. And so basically, many of us in our Christian circles, as we're talking, we're talking about church unity. We're saying God basically put us on, a 40-day timeout for a second, not saying God authored the virus in any way, but, just like in the Old Testament with Joseph, where Joseph says, what, you meant for evil, God turned it to good. And so we're looking at this opportunity as like God's uniting pastors more than ever. He's uniting his church more than ever. And people in the Christian faith are taking more personal responsibility, because we get many questions from people in our church like, well, who's going to teach my kids? Because, in the evangelical church, we have what's called children's church, where we, teach them a Bible. They don't usually meet in the adult sanctuary. So they say, who's going to teach my kids? Who's going to pastor them? We respond with, you are. You're their pastor. You're their teacher. I mean, that's the way it should be, even pre and post quarantine type of thing. And so, we've really been seeing people's excitement level for their faith rise, which is truly incredible. It's nothing we were expecting. All churches basically were going into this going, all right, let's just hope people still stay connected. And then let's just hope we can financially keep our doors open still when this thing is over. But by and large, I mean, I'm talking to friends who have churches of 50, 100, because I believe the evangelical church has always kind of somewhat been open to innovation. The evangelical church kind of, we jumped in with what pray.com was doing, an app based around prayer. It sounds ludicrous. I even recently did another interview, and a girl said, that just sounds weird that people would go to an app and post a prayer and people pray for them. I said, yeah, it may sound weird, but this past Christmas, I have a fireplace in my house. We didn't like the fireplace. We went to Netflix and we put on the digital Yule log with Christmas music, even though there was a fireplace sitting right under it. And I told her, you're just going to have to explain to me why we did that. It's because we're apt to technology nowadays. And so when we look at prayer, when we look at worship, there's no replacement for being in community with one another. That within all of our faith traditions, personal community is the utmost importance. But great additions are really adapting these online things, praying with people online, helping people online. We're doing our counseling sessions. We were in the middle of, because like at our church, we have a huge counseling center. So, we deal with people who are struggling with, addictions and alcoholism and all these other things. And the moment this happened, it was like, well, how are we going to fix this? And our pastoral care team, even the ones who were a little older and didn't even know how to work it, they all learned Zoom immediately, and all of our programs transitioned to Zoom and online. And so it wasn't like, what are we getting rid of in this season? It's like, how do we fulfill what we do normally in this season? And then on top of that, how do we do it better? Because more people are going to be online sharing things. And that's where we've seen, like, our church services have grown. Prayers on pray.com app have gone up 40%. I mean, you're seeing things left and right begin to trickle up because people are hungry. When you put people alone, they start wondering more and more, what's out there? Where is God in all this? It's created a hunger in the absence of being able to go out and get lost at the football game or go to the gym and just get your mind out. Now people are at home actually having to introspect, and now it's creating curiosity. And so we're churches by and large, we're all talking with one another, and everyone's very excited about what this is taking us through in this process.
Well, I mean, and I mean, that's really interesting about pray.com having that huge surge in people participating. People being able to, right now especially, I think it's a big time for when a lot of people want prayers said. There are a lot of prayers to be said for folks. I'm in various Facebook groups where people are continuously asking for prayers about people who have the novel coronavirus. So
absolutely.
So I want to go to the idea that as religious leaders, you are involved in a lot of high points and low points in people's lives. We're talking weddings, dealing with ceremonies after birth, whether those are baptisms or a bris milah. circumcision. And so, you know, and then of course you have funerals. And I'm curious how those, you know, periods of mourning, funerals, as well as weddings, bar bat mitzvahs, you know, the various sacraments of the church, how those have moved forward in this time amid quarantine. It's a very big question. So, you know, feel free to jump in.
I want to jump in for one that occurred to me when Pastor Adam was talking, is that there's also a huge generational divide here that is now being collapsed and erased to some extent. I mean, we are the first generation where young people had indispensable life skills that old people didn't have. That was never true before. It's not like young people were born knowing how to do agriculture or business, but they were basically born knowing how to do technology, and older people not. I mean, I've sat at my computer and been incredibly frustrated, and my daughter will walk by and I say, this thing won't work, and she'll go boop, and then all of a sudden it works, right? Because it's like born into people. What's happening now, of course, is that older people by force have had to learn the power and some of the ease of technology, which is gonna really have, I think, tremendous effects when this is all over, because that knowledge and that ease won't go away. And you see it in exactly the kinds of things that you were talking about. We have in the Jewish tradition what's the equivalent of a final confession called the vidui. And I've now done a couple of them, not by standing at the bedside of the person who is dying, which is how you usually do it, but by virtual presence. And what has struck me is that it's not as powerful in one way, because there is nothing like human presence. But in another way, the fact that you are doing it despite the fact that you can't do it gives it a special power. It's like they think, oh my God, what are we going to do? This person is dying. And then they call the rabbi, and the rabbi says, we can do it, you know, by FaceTime or whatever. And the sense of we're so grateful that we could still do it gives it even more power in a certain way. So I think that there are paradoxes that we haven't worked out yet. Young and old, person and distance, the ability to do it across the world as opposed to only with people that you're in the room. And I'm not sure how this will all shake out for all of our faith communities, but I'm reasonably sure that we will not go back to the exact same status quo once this is over, because I think we have realized, especially those of us that are older, have realized the enormity of the reach and power in intimate ways, not only in broad ways we knew, but in intimate ways that technology affords.
I mean, it sounds like you've been, are you planning to do virtual funerals then?
Done virtual funerals, yes, all of that, exactly, yeah.
What about-
I can weigh in here as well.
Yeah, please, yes. Imam?
Sunday, and he is hello.
Hey, looks like we might have had a little bit of technical
Hello.
difficulty.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little garbled.
Is this better?
Yeah, there you go.
All right. So I think we have 4 kids at home, and my wife and everyone is Zooming into their classes. So we might have a technology overload from my home. I was going to say, I've, with regards to religious ritual relating to weddings and funerals, etc., there is a requirement for washing the body after death, and scholars have weighed in and said, you know, waived some of these obligations because of the danger involved to the community members who usually volunteer to perform the ritual washing and the wrapping of the body for burial. And so, you know, there's been some exceptions to how things are done. Also, I've done already 2 weddings. I have another one coming up this Sunday. They're done virtually via Zoom. And so, you know, I did attend one here or officiate one here in Westwood. in person, but there was only the bride and the groom present. I kept my 6 feet apart, social distancing best practices. And there were probably, 20, 30 people all over the country who had Zoomed in for that wedding, who had planned to fly in for the big celebration at a large hotel, etc. So we're handling that, those things that way. What other rituals did you have a question about?
Yeah, and I'm curious about circumcision. Any sort of rituals that typically would occur in person right now. People are still being born, obviously.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll just say about circumcision, because I think we share that with the Jewish community. Although for us, it's less of a ritual that involves community as much as it is an obligation that should occur when a child is born. And so what we usually do is in the hospital, before the newborn is sent home, the circumcision occurs there. And so that's still ongoing. That has not been interrupted because it's not done. We don't have a mohel. It's not done at the mosque. It's done in the hospital by the physician. And so that's uninterrupted.
Is that the same in the Jewish faith right now, or
well, it has become the same to some extent because people won't have a circumcision by and large. I shouldn't say exclusively, but the families that I've been in touch with, and I advise them not to have a mohel in their home because you can't social distance when you're circumcising a baby, obviously. And so I know 1 or 2 have done it in the hospital, and 1 or 2 have decided to wait. But it's a really agonizing decision for many families, and there is no perfect solution here. So
I did want to ask about mourning as well. I mean, there's a period where people, in the Jewish faith, they sit.
So we have them join our virtual service in the morning and in the afternoon, and we acknowledge that they are because we read the names of people who are in mourning. We acknowledge that they are joining us and note the loss that they've had. But again, like every other ritual, it would normally, part of the point of the ritual is to gather in community. And part of the bane of our time is this is the first time that we remember in human history, certainly in any of our lifetimes, when you literally cannot gather in community. So we do it on screen, at least for now.
Pastor Adam, there are many sort of, there are the sacraments, the various sacraments of the church, which do include matrimony and communion and stuff. I was curious if you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I know that, Catholics might,
vary, be a variance.
There's varying, right? But if you could discuss what you're seeing and hearing.
I mean, by and large, like the others had mentioned, I actually during this quarantine 2 weeks ago, my father-in-law passed. So we had to plan a funeral, even in our own immediate family during this time. And it was basically our immediate family in the church. And we live streamed on YouTube, emailed private links, and 1,600 people ended up watching the funeral. And my mother-in-law, she remarked and said, I actually liked this because, number one, the family was really there for one another. It was, it was us. And then she also said, and more people attended the funeral than online than would have actually came to the building. And so she loved that. Basically us remembering him went to thousands of people because my father-in-law was a godly man. He loved and served Jesus. And so it was important for her that people know that and know how much of a great husband and father he was. So, we experienced that, and it really was beautiful, and still grieving and mourning at the same time. And we've had other people in our church doing the same thing, having to live stream funerals. But when it comes to our actual practice of sacraments, we basically have had to do them digitally or teach people how to do them digitally. So when it comes to baptisms in the Protestant evangelical faith, we believe anyone that's a disciple of Jesus could baptize. We don't believe, even though by and large a pastor does it, we don't believe that a pastor is essential in doing it. And so what we've been doing is we've been explaining to people both through our social media as they ask and they say, hey, I want to be baptized. How can I do it? We get calls from people to say, hey, can a pastor just pop over And what we say is we say, no, we can't. But what we recommend, if anyone in the household or who you're in proximity with, because obviously we're social distancing, but our families we're still interacting with. If anyone else in your family is a disciple of Christ, they can baptize you. Here's how you do it. You either fill the bathtub up, or if you have a pool or something, you go to it and then you do the baptism process. And so we'll then walk them through it. And some have said, like Rabbi Wolpe said, some have said, I'll wait and I'll get baptized when we gather again. And then others have said, no, it's important for me to do it right now. I want to remember during this quarantine how I found God. And so we're like, great, let's do it. And so, that's how we've been doing it in that process. The same thing with communion. Like this Friday is going to be Good Friday, where we remember where Jesus instituted the Last Supper and he instituted communion. And so for us, what we're doing is we're doing kind of a social blast, and we're telling people grab any type of communion element, any bread, any cracker, any juice, and join us Friday at 7:00. We're going to have a time of worship. And then our pastoral team is going to lead our congregation online in communion. So, we basically been looking how we have to innovate. But in that process, we are seeing more people engage into our acts of faith than if they just came to the building. And the best example I've been giving to like our team and other people right now, I feel like it's exactly that scenario of when you're in the playground or there's a play date and there's a toy that no one's touching. And then the moment one kid goes to pick up a toy, the other kid goes, hey, I was playing with that. And it's like, no, you weren't. You weren't playing with that. And we're really seeing that when it comes to people's hunger for God. It's like the moment you stripped away physical gatherings, people were like, I just wanted to start taking that serious. I just wanted to start going to church. And instead now they've been going, well, now I want it. I want as much as I can get because I can't go to the physical building. And so it has had that beautiful side of things where the fact that people can't get up and just go to a building, means that they're now taking, far more of that responsibility, like a church. And then even when it comes to the sacraments, so people are doing communion at home. During the quarantine, it happened with my father-in-law before he passed. I drove over and we did communion with him 2 days prior before he went home to be with the Lord. And so, we're looking at ways that we can continue to do those things. And again, that's, I'm really speaking on top of the, on an evangelical, Protestant side of things. And so the Catholic Church has a little bit more sacraments. And so someone from there would be able to speak a little bit more intently on the sacraments, the added sacraments that they do and how they have to qualify those through what they're doing on Zoom and other things like that.
Tami, I know we only have a minute before we go to the questions and answers. I just wanted to share one other thing that we're doing.
We've been throwing them in throughout anyway. So.
Okay. Well, really quickly, one of the things that we've done, really, this is our moment. I mean, for the last couple of years, we've been working on developing a sort of Netflix for Islamic studies, just as like a learning platform to give people the opportunity who want to do a deep study, but they might live in some remote corner of the world and have busy lives. So on an on-demand basis, they can take a serious course on Islamic theology or philosophy or history or law, etc. And so now that the novel coronavirus has come along, we've kind of sped up our production and are going to be launching a new version of that, what we call Bayan Online, which is this platform for people to study at home. Because part of what people go to community to do, half of it's socializing and the other half is to be educated and to learn and to be inspired. And so, we're doing some live streaming, but we also have this sort of more in-depth platform for people who want to take it to the next level. So that's something that has really started to take off now in the era of coronavirus.
Thank you so much. And yes, Imam, I was going to ask you about that. I just want to pause for a moment and tell Pastor Adam, I'm so sorry about the loss that you've experienced.
Thank you so much.
It's definitely a rough time to have to deal with that.
Thank you.
I'm sure your experience is what a lot of people unfortunately have been having to struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Of course. So, I think we talked about sort of these high and low points. What about members? I mean, by and large, in the US at least, and actually throughout the world, a lot of those who do engage in religion, unfortunately, tend to be, at least in cities especially, maybe a little older than the average bear. Maybe married with kids, but older. And younger people less so. So I'm curious, has this brought up engagement from younger people, and has this left older people behind in any way? Have they been isolated and alone and maybe unable to partake because they don't have an iPhone or they're just not that tech savvy? How have you guys dealt with that? Maybe we'll start with you, Rabbi.
So there are two sides to this. I have heard from younger single people, I'm missing my I'm trying to find somebody to spend my life with, and this is a pause, and I don't like this pause so I have encouraged them to see it as not as a pause but as a preparation. That is, if you understand yourself better and you go inside yourself and you learn yourself and you clarify your values, then when this is over, you will actually be better able to find the person that you should spend your life with, and this is an opportunity to do that we don't normally get. In the same way that the earth is taking a Sabbath in a strange way and regenerating itself, so can individuals. But yes, it has had that effect for some older members. And so we have set up, again, we've set up like pairings where older members can learn what to do, how to turn on their computers and find what they need to find to be connected to us. We send out emails where I give every day I send out a 1-minute inspiration. It's a video, it's a minute long, at most a minute and a half. And they can just click on that in the letter that they get in their email, and it will bring them to the YouTube video. And there on the page, they'll also see all the other stuff that we're doing. It's a learning curve, and it will take some time. And some people won't actually ever be comfortable with the electronics, and they will be incredibly grateful when they can find themselves in person again. But every challenge, has obstacles and opportunities. So there are some blessings that come with this, but for some people, it is isolating beyond, I think, what most of us can imagine. They feel cut off from their community, and they even feel cut off from the virtual community that all of us are participating in, and that's very hard.
Yeah. Why don't we go to Pastor Adam? What have you been seeing?
Yeah. So, for us, one of the first things we did immediately when we went into quarantine was we pulled up a list of every single person in our church over 60. And every one of our employees spent the next 4 days calling really thousands of people over their 60s and just simply asking them, what do you need? How can we help you stay connected? And how can we, continue to minister to you? And some would tell us, I need toilet paper, I need this, I need that. And our staff would go and get it, drop it out their door and leave. And then others, so I know what some churches are doing. We haven't done this process. So what some churches do is they've been putting their services through like a phone app, and all the elderly person has to do is dial in and they can listen like on the phone. But what we've been doing is, because many people in our church, we have about 6,300 people in our church on pray.com. And so what we do is we actually text a lot. We put a link in pray.com, and when someone's part of a faith community in the app, it immediately texts them. And so what we've been telling the elderly people in our community is, ahead of time, we've done it for many months. We've installed the app on their phone, and now when we go live with service, all we do is post it and they get a text message that we're live. All they do is click the text message, because most of them know how to text. So all they do is click that text message and then they're in. And then we've just basically been facilitating. And same thing for Rabbi Wolpe. We've had this whole singles community who have, said, how do I meet someone? I've usually been looking for someone at church. I'm looking for a Christian person. I don't want to meet them. Well, obviously they can't go to the bar or anything else right now, but they're like, how am I going to meet someone? So me and my wife we basically made it fun. We're taking our faith serious, but we're also using this environment as an opportunity to have fun. So Right now, every Tuesday and Thursday, me and my wife go live on Instagram with a couple other of our pastors and his wife, and we do a live relationship, both singles and married Q&A hour. And then there we give shout outs to people who are single. So we'll say, hey, in the chat right now, if you're single, it's that old AOL instant messenger thing, you know, put single, put your age, all that kind of stuff like that. And then actually this week we're going to be launching for fun. We're going to record it. It's going to be called Christian Zoom Mates, where we're going to take 10 singles. They're going to go on Zoom. They have to turn their cameras off. And it's going to be, you know, they basically have to answer some like fun Bible trivia, all that. And then at the end, we turn everyone turns their cameras on and they meet each other for the first time. So it's
nice.
Like Netflix has that viral show called Love is Blind. So it's like the Christian Love is Blind version, and everybody's super excited about it. So we're just looking at how we could take opportunities to bring enjoyment to people in this season, while also taking our faith very serious, because it is Easter and it is a very both somber but rejoiceful season as well. And so it's a both and principle for us right now. And we're reaching out, calling all of our elderly community, and then engaging our young millennials through social media on a regular basis. Every single day, we're posting something and engaging with them.
Imam Turk, I'd love your thoughts on this, and then I'll throw in a couple audience questions we've since received.
So the Muslim American community, we're about 3.3 million in number, and 2/3 are immigrants from India, Pakistan on the one hand, or Arab countries from the other. The other probably third are African American Muslims. So think of someone like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Muhammad Ali, right, from that tradition. So for the immigrant communities, they are pretty tech savvy. And so there's not an issue with them connecting and utilizing technology. However, it's going to be, and I didn't speak to it yet, there's going to be a big challenge for the month of Ramadan. So although it's Passover tomorrow and Easter coming up on Sunday, the 24th, or the evening of the 23rd actually, will be the first night of Ramadan, and the first day of fasting will be the 24th. And it's a month of intensive socializing in person, breaking bread, and people would have abstained from food and drink, not the 24-hour fast that you have in the Jewish tradition, but for 16, 17 hours in a day, every day for 30 days. And so each night people gather together, rich and poor, of every different ethnic and racial background, and break bread together. And it is unparalleled in terms of the emotions and the bonding that occurs over this struggle and this effort that one puts into becoming a better human being, and to be more empathetic to those who are without food regularly, and to become more charitable as a consequence. And so the human bonding that occurs there is really going to be a challenge. And so we're talking to folks who are still interested in carrying on that experience virtually. And so maybe having dinners where, or breaking of the fast in the evening, where people will connect via Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know if you had another aspect to the question that you want me to address specifically, but generally our community is pretty tech savvy and utilizing, able to utilize what's available and are thinking of creative ways to engage with that moving forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, that perfectly addresses that question. Thank you so much, Imam Turk. We have a question from Ahmed Mirza that is asking the panel, is there any thought on how religious communities adjust post-corona? How do you ensure that once this is over, people come back and start attending religious services in person? And then I'll add to this question, do they also attend virtually at the same time? Are there changes you see to what services look like and ceremonies look like that will continue moving forward?
I think that it's not possible to know what will happen when this is over. It in part depends on how long this goes on and what other kinds of accommodations we make, not only in the world, but also inside ourselves. But I think my guess is I'm going to speak at least a little bit for both Imam Turk and Pastor Adam when I say that the deep spiritual hunger in human beings is an essential part of our nature. This is who we are. And it doesn't matter how long you keep people in isolation, the moment you lift the gate, they will go rushing towards one another again. That's who we are. Just as in isolation, we have our spiritual hunger, in isolation, we have our social hungers. And so there's a part of me that knows that things will be different, but also knows that the desire for human beings to connect to one another is a beautiful, eternal, and unquenchable part of human nature. So ultimately, although we may need to make different kinds of accommodations along the way, we'll find our way back to one another again.
What about you, Imam Turk? What happens when people can potentially gather again? And how is the community adjusting? Will they continue to also meet virtually? What happens in your mind?
So there's already conversations taking place about what can be done. There's still a lot of unknowns, but for certain, there are conversations about what best practices can be adopted to make sure that there's a very stringent, not only hygiene regimen and in place within the mosque. And people, part of our prayer involves ritual washing. So I would imagine that the attention paid to the places that involve, faucets and handles and all of that, there'll be some protocol in place to make sure, even moving forward after we're out of this current crisis, that those commonly touched places are not gonna spread any communicable disease or illness. The other thing is that although it's part of the tradition, it's part of the prophetic tradition to not attend congregational prayer when ill. I think there's going to be a fine point put on that notion moving forward, and there'll be kind of a mandatory or an enforced policy regarding not attending congregational gatherings while symptomatic with any illness.
Pastor Adam, I'd love your thoughts on this issue. And also, there's been a request specifically about where people can, where Matthew Potter could get more content from you specifically.
Oh, okay. So I have content on the pray.com app. There's a content gallery. So I have messages there on pray.com. You just go to the content library and you can pick the speaker. So I'm on there. And then also just YouTube. Our church is Abundant Living Family Church. So anyone could go to YouTube or Facebook, type in Abundant Living Family Church, look for our kind of logo, and you'll be able to find messages there and our live services and stuff like that. I think the question really is really in reverse. I agree with Imam and Rabbi Wolpe, who's how he basically said that when the gates are open, people are going to flood. I mean, you see this hunger. I don't think that's going to be an issue. What I think is going to be an issue is, many of us in the Protestant evangelical church, we have become innovative in this season and really trying to keep people connected. And even for some churches, for the sheer fact that they went online, it is a big deal. And they weren't online before, or they weren't live streaming services. So I think you're going to have a lot of people post quarantine who are going to be like, I really liked that though. I was really enjoying that. I couldn't always make it to church, or I really like that things you guys did on Monday, or I shared me and my wife, we're doing this relationship thing on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There's going to be people who are going to be like, you guys have to keep that. And we're going to be like, oh, wow, well, that was a lot of hard work, and we were doing that during quarantine. And, so we're going to really, and we've talked about it as a team, is, let's keep in mind that if we do something and do it well, we have to be prepared to maintain what it is that people are enjoying even after. We don't have to run as fast in this way, but we do have to continue. So whatever decision, I just believe whatever decision you make to move forward, just realize there's going to be a back end that people are going to hope and expect that you maintain that even after post-quarantine, which has huge advantages, but it also has a lot of struggles like finances and time and staffing and all those other things like that. But I really think that the question is really opposite. You know, me the same way. There are restaurants right now that I'm getting delivery that I enjoy that they didn't deliver before. And when this ends, if they don't deliver anymore, I'm gonna be mad because I enjoyed getting them delivered to my house. So I think everyone is gonna have to wrestle through how everyone processes after this. And like Rabbi Wolpe said, there's no way to 100% know. It's pure speculation at this point, but it does have its challenges at the same time too.
Thank you so much. You know, I looked up at the time and it's 12 o'clock. Well, it's 12:01, now 12:02. And we had a hard stop at 12, but I did want to make sure that I gave everyone the opportunity to add any final thoughts before we pop off here. I really appreciate you all sharing an hour of your time. Rabbi Wolpe, if you have any final thoughts.
My only final thought is that one of the things that is illustrated by the fact that you brought us all together and by this discussion is that more than any time in human history, this proves that all people are one. The fact that someone could do something in China and as a result we're having a Zoom conversation in Los Angeles. The fact that all over the world, people in countries we've never visited and don't know are going through the same things that we're going through and quarantined in their homes. There is something both painful and also glorious about that. And so I hope when this is over that we don't forget.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Rabbi. Pastor Adam, what about you? Any final thoughts? And then we'll give Imam Turk the last word here.
Yeah, not too much entirely. Just thank you so much for doing this. It's incredible that you guys would even open the platform for a conversation like this and allow different faith leaders to be able to speak on an issue. I mean, I know I was curious myself walking into this to see how synagogues and mosques are, you know, developing within this season as well. So it's informative for myself. And other than that, I mean, I know for us in the Christian church, now I can say this more broadly before I've been having to speak for evangelicals or something like that, but I know for Catholics and Christians and everyone all over, we are inherently absolutely excited for Easter this week. And it's something that we're looking at as an opportunity of something to rejoice and not mourn that we can't meet in person. We're gonna, you know, we really want to take this opportunity to grow closer to God. That's really what it's about. And then when this is over, we want to develop and strengthen in community in a deeper way. So yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pastor. And Imam, any final thoughts to share? Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you know, Ramadan is, as I mentioned before, it's an important part of the calendar, and socializing is a big part of that. But the core of it is reconnecting, as Pastor Adam was just saying. The goal of it is to try and grow in your character through putting yourself through some discipline, right? But ultimately, it's to grow in your character and to grow closer to God. And if we look back at the practice at the time of Muhammad 1400 years ago, he did these extra nightly prayers home by himself. And so, and although the practice since then has always been to do it in congregation, this is an opportunity for the Muslim community to really go back to the origin and try to engage in these extra prayers at home individually, to introspect and to really try and grow in one's awareness and consciousness and conscientiousness in who they are and how it is that they can improve in their character and draw near unto God. And based on that, and this is the kind of the proof in the pudding, be of greater service to their fellow human being and to humanity. And so that's I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Imam. Thank you, all three of you. I appreciate your time. We all appreciate your time. And very happy holidays over these next few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.